Welcome back, Dram Fam. Thompson Brothers. It'd be rude not to, wouldn't it? These two kind of go hand in hand. They are the big talked about releases from Thompson Brothers at the moment. This is the one that I reviewed very recently, the Thompson Brothers blended Scotch whisky, which is a heavily sherried 6-year-old blended Scotch whisky. Go and have a look at my review of that one if you're interested or curious about that one. The one that we'll be looking at today is Thompson Brothers SRV5. And obviously, we all know what SRV5 stands for, don't we? I don't actually know if it tells you anywhere on the label what that means. I'm not sure that it does actually, but SRV, the S has got to be single malt, hasn't it? Single malt reserve, number 5, 5 years old. The 5 has got to be the age statement, surely. Or maybe it's SRV5, 5 years old. Very sensible guesses, but it actually stands for Station Road VAT number 5. So it's referring to the location of Thompson Brothers over in Dornoch, and the fact that this is married and rested in VAT number 5. Simple. So other details that we've got on the label of this one. We are told that it is a blended malt Scotch whisky. So whereas this one was a blended Scotch, so that tells us that there is probably grain whisky gone into this one. So whereas this one is a blended Scotch, so we know there's grain whisky in this one, we know that there is 0 grain whisky gone into this. It is a blend of 2 or more single malts. We are told that it's not 5 years old, it's actually aged over 8 years, so at least 8 years and a day. It's bottled at a fantastic ABV of 48.5%. It's natural colour and non-chill filtered. They did it and they didn't even hide it. They put it on the label. Such an easy thing to do, yet so many struggle so much. But Thompson Brothers have done it. We're also told that the juice from this stuff is married in a 1200 litre European oak vat. And because they are calling that vat a Solera vat, what they actually do is that they never let the level on this vat drop below 1/3. So I'm sure you guys know all about this, but the idea of a Solera vat is that it's like an infinity bottle, and any vat, as long as it's big enough, can be a Solera vat, as long as you never allow it to actually empty. And the idea being that eventually, over time, you have traces of that very, very old stuff that have been living in that vat potentially for a very long time. So you end up with a true multi-vintage vatting, which would otherwise probably be very, very hard to do. Obviously, you could empty your Solera vat every time and just sell everything at 3 years old. So whether you believe that Solera vats actually have a purpose or benefit is up to you. But we are told that Thompson Brothers, they never let it drop below 1/3. We're also told that this is sold in small batches of 800 bottles at a time, which means that this stuff does go out of stock fairly regularly, but it usually comes back fairly quickly. As for what actually goes in that vat, we are given some rough clues. We're told that it's a vatting of North Highland, Islay and Speyside single malts. And the price of this one, I think the same as the TBBSW. I paid £32 for each of these. So not at all expensive whiskey. When you're looking at stuff that's got a full craft presentation and a 46% plus ABV, it's really, really good value. You can pay £64 and have a pair of these. Obviously, we haven't got to the tasting of this one yet, but a little bit of a spoiler. I think that buying a pair of these, if it's available to you, is a really great choice and offers some fantastic value. So Thompson Brothers SRV5, which is an 8-year-old blended malt. Let's get some in the glass. Give you a little close-up of the label, because they have put some time and effort and some money into getting what I think is a nice label. I know some people aren't a massive fan of the slightly cartoony style, but I like it. That's obviously meant to be the Solera vat itself. Show you the back label so you can pause and have a read if you want. Thompson Brothers SRV5 on the nose. Very, very juicy, and that's something that I quite often get from a lot of blended malts. Very juicy, very malty, slightly sharp maltiness and sweet malt. Sharp malt, sweet malt, creamy malt, a little bit of a vanilla cream, which is probably coming through possibly from some bourbon casks. Whether that's the actual wood of the vat, probably not, or probably the cask that the whiskey was matured in before it went into that marrying vat. Creamy custard and an aroma note that reminds me of being next to an open top mash tun. If you're ever fortunate enough to be at a distillery that has an open top mash tun, of which there aren't that many, Bruichladdich is one. If you're lucky enough to be there when they're actually doing a mash, that is a wonderful aroma to experience, and there's a little bit of that in here. Slightly sour lemon and lime note within that kind of sharp malty profile. Slightly salty, slightly briny, and a little bit of an acetic note on the nose. A little slightly akin to like a Weiss beer. A little bit of a dry grapefruit note in that sharp maltiness as well. Slight starchiness, possibly betraying a little bit of age, but really nothing to worry about. Nice oakiness, prickly dry oak, and a fairly light and subtle and not particularly obvious or boisterous, but a slightly farmy peatiness on this one, very much hidden in the background. Sweet and sour and intense, laser sharp. I really love this profile in whiskey, whether it's a single malt or a blended malt. I think it's something that you very often get in blended malts, and it's something that I love and never get bored of. Let's see how it tastes. Palate really very much follows through from the nose. Lots of sweet malt, laser sharp as the nose was, green apple, and lots of astringent grapefruit. Really nice barley sugar note going through this one. A little bit of white chocolate on the palate, a little bit of a caramac note, quite creamy, but all balanced really well with a nice dry oakiness. And a really pleasant little background note of dirty, fumey, and slightly farmy smokiness. And I think that slightly creamy caramac note with that slightly farmy peat, it kind of reminds me of a slightly sharper and less peaty Macabee. Lovely flavours, wonderful flavour profile, beautifully sharp and juicy and malty, really with all the other flavours acting as a supporting cask of background elements. Gonna have one more sip and look at the finish. I think the finish is ever so slightly light and perhaps a little bit short. It's quite malty, quite fruity, as you'd expect, just with a lingering astringency and that slight touch of light, farmy smokiness. I do think, and this confused me for quite a while, that there is an element of predictability when it comes to these young vatted malts. They very often have this similar juicy, fruity, slightly sour and sharp, malty barley sugar profile. And in that sense, this SRV5 from Thompson Brothers, it's kind of exactly as imagined. It's really very, very much what I expected it to be. So no surprises there. So it's kind of disappointing in a way, but also really excellent because it's a profile that I really, really love. It quite reminds me of Orchard House, that blended malt from Compass Box that I believe is still around. They're probably on several batches later since I reviewed it, because it's probably quite a while ago that I reviewed that now, but reminds me a little bit of that because it's got that juiciness and fruitiness. Also reminds me quite a bit of the Loch Lomond Distillery Edition number 3. and that's another one that I reviewed fairly recently, and I loved that stuff. I think I've still got some left, because they had that extra long fermentation. It really brought out the juicy, fruity, estery notes. And I think that there's a strong similarity between that and this. Also reminds me of some of the juicy and sharp whiskies that we've had from Kingsbarns, as well as Campbelltown Lock and Spice King, which those of you who are paying attention will realise are also blended malts. I think this is a really, really good one though. I've said it before, I think that with blended malts, they really are the key to getting really good value for money out of affordable Scotch whisky these days. I think that with the more affordable Scotch blended malt range that we've got now, as long as you like that profile, you can get whisky which is head and shoulders above most of the current offerings in the more affordable single malts. This is without a doubt a world-class blended malt though. And the cherry on the top is that you don't even have to pay silly prices to get it. I do wonder if some of that slightly sour smokiness might be a little bit of Caol Ila in the vatting, and I wonder if a little bit of that fruitiness might be some Linkwood, because we know that there's some, I think there's Linkwood and Caol Ila both in Compass Box Orchard House, and I can imagine if some of the flavour notes in this one are coming through from a similar place. Compared to Orchard House, I think that this one, it has possibly a little bit more power, a little bit sharper, a little bit less fruity, but really they're both incredibly well made blended malts. As to why so many of these blended malts do have that similar profile, my only explanation is that if you are one of these distilleries or independent bottlers looking to do a blended malt, it possibly doesn't make sense to slap a heavy cask influence on it. We can only assume that if you are one of these producers and you've gone to the trouble of marrying two or more single malts together, then there must be a reason for that. You must be planning to say something with the recipe of single malts. So I think that's how I've justified it. I think that's the reason for a lot of these blended malts being similar, that it only makes sense to try and do a blended malt if you are trying to say something with the blending of the single malts rather than the cask influence. I also think that because of the way that most consumers are these days, the way that a lot of people run a mile as soon as they see the word blend on it, without even considering whether it's a blended malt or a blended Scotch, I think that probably keeps the price point down for a lot of these whiskies. So that's possibly why they tend to be very fresh and bright and juicy, malt-driven expressions that are relatively light on expensive sherry casks and things like that. But I, for one, am very, very glad that these young and fresh blended malts exist. I think that they're superb fun and superb value for money, far, far outperforming the upper tier, more expensive blended Scotch whiskies, and even some mid-tier single malts in my opinion. My only criticism of this Thompson Brothers SRV5, if I was going to have one at all, is that you can probably get a similar profile from a lot of other blended malts, and some of them are cheaper, especially if you're willing to sacrifice some ABV. Talking about things like the Little Glenorchy, which is a similar profile, obviously a little bit younger and quite a bit lighter, and pretty much all of your supermarket blended malt whiskies, because they are all very similar, to the point where they kind of seem like they might be made by the same people. So you can get cheaper versions of this. Are they as good? No. Well, maybe with the exception of Spice King. I think Spice King is pretty on par with this, especially if you get the higher strength version of Spice King. Gives this a damn good run for its money. But I think that if you like juicy malt-driven blended malts, then this is a really incredible one, both for the price and just in general. As with the Thompson Brothers TBBSW, I think if you're considering buying this or both, just do it. It is possibly the best £64 that you can spend on a litre of whiskey in 2024. Interesting though, compared to the the Thompson Brothers BSW. A little bit of an aside. I bought these because I wanted this one. I thought that this looked and sounded from other people's reviews like another one of these blended malt whiskies that I really like, and I really like that flavour profile. And I basically bought this one because it was also available and it was cheap, and I thought it'd be good to do a little Thompson Brothers duet. And to be honest, I wasn't expecting a lot from this one because this is my bias. We're all guilty of it because it is a blended Scotch whisky and it's only 6 years old and it's heavily sherried. I thought that has potential to be some ropey whisky in a heavily sherried cask. And I was wrong. A test that I've mentioned a few times, when it comes to a whisky reviewer, almost as useful as listening to their words and opinion and what they think about a whisky, is looking at the fill level in the bottle. How much have they been compelled to drink before they actually get to reviewing it? And if you look at fill levels here, bearing in mind that I've poured a fairly generous glass of this one to do the review just now, I've actually drunk more of the TBBSW than I have the SV5, and that really surprises me because I thought that this was the one that I wanted, and this one was kind of a why not purchase. But out of these two, I do actually think that I've been enjoying the TBBSW quite a lot more. Both fantastic whiskies though, well worth £32 each. Let me know what you think of this one, or Thompson Brothers. In particular, I have been really tempted to try that kind of tongue-in-cheek label that Thompson Brothers did fairly recently in the Tesco value label. I think that's utter genius, and bearing in mind that I think it's a blended malt, same as the SRV5 from Thompson Brothers. Really curious to give that a try. So let me know what you think about that one as well if you've had it. Until next time, thanks for watching and cheers.